In this video, we're going to go over the assembly of a catalyst ratio sleeve for the 437 Big Bear. Step number one is to note that you have a left catalyst in block and you have a right catalyst in block. And we call them that based on looking at the front of a piece of equipment, how they're installed on the piece of equipment. You have the cutouts for your guard on the left-hand side, and you don't on the right-hand side. The first thing we're going to do is lay these on their side, and we're going to clock our inserts correctly. You have one that has an L on it. That's your left hand, and then obviously the right is your right-hand side. And they have locator dowel pins, so they only go in one side. And those ports will line up with the port on here and the port on that side. So we want to make sure those are easy to install when they're all greased up and they have all the O-rings on them. So I'm going to put them in to their respective locations without anything on them first, just to locate them. And then I'm going to make a mark on these so that we can locate them while we're putting it with the O-rings and they're more of a tight fit. So you can use anything to scratch or scribe. I use the corner of a screwdriver or a razor blade, or even just a marker to give yourself a reference line. I'm just going to drag a little line so that I have a locator for when I assemble these. And I usually do that right under the letters. Now I have references to install them. Now today I'm making this ratio sleeve is being used with a structural silicone, and I'm going to use this Molykote 33 medium extreme low temperature grease. This is a silicone based grease, and it works really well for almost all applications. But think about what chemical you're running through and make sure that the grease is compatible with the chemical you're running. For silicones, I'm using a silicone based grease. I'm using an acetone brush. I'm just going to grease the grooves of these two inserts, as well as the diameters inside of my end blocks. I've got one groove inside each insert and then two on the outside. Once I have that greased up, I'm going to get some grease on my fingers to go ahead and lubricate the O-rings that are installed onto this insert piece, these insert pieces. I'm going to start with the ones on the inside. You got the two smaller ones, just fit them to the groove on the inside diameter, these inserts. Next I'm going to go with the larger, the thicker brown O-ring, finally followed by the black backup O-ring in their respective grooves. It looks like that. Okay. Now I'm going to find my locator mark that I scribed, and I'm going to line it up with my end block. This one you kind of have to put some pressure to get past those O-rings, and it should go down into place. I'm going to do the same thing on the left end block. Locating my scribed line, and then pressure to get them in there. Try to avoid using a hammer or a mallet for this step. Try to use your hands so that you can feel and make sure you're not shearing the O-rings as you install these end blocks, these inserts into the end blocks. I'm going to flip these over to the other side and install the packing. And we're going to follow the same process on the right and the left, starting with, again, some grease on the inside diameter of both of these end blocks. Next comes our Teflon O-rings. They drop all the way to the bottom, and there's a groove that those both go into. and we have to seat them into that groove. I like to use just a socket or any kind of long object to just tap those O-rings into place where they seat. They're seated in the groove. Now I'm going to proceed with my V-packing. On each side you have this V-packing, and this is what keeps the chemical inside of these sleeves under high pressure. So you have a whole set of pieces. You have what's called the male piece at the very bottom. It's the domed, the one with a dome on the top of it. And then you have a whole series of chevrons. And finally, the female that closes off everything. We're going to put them with the chevrons facing down, starting with the male packing, installing them one by one. And I like to put a little bit of grease on just about every second or third V-packing as I install it into the end block. About halfway through, use your socket to make sure everything's seating and finish up with the last few packings. We do the same thing on the other side. Now I'm going to move on to my gland nuts on either side. They're both going to be the same, and I've got two O-rings that go into a groove, one here and one here on both of these gland nuts. Again, a little bit of grease to lubricate the O-rings and install them into those O-ring grooves. The next step on these, you can't really see it, but there's a cutout on the inside. There's a cutout on the inside of that groove. I'll draw it here for you. The inside of this, we have an O-ring groove, and then we have a cutout where we're going to fill with grease, and then our other O-ring groove. We have an O-ring and an O-ring, and then we're going to put grease in this groove. And to do that, I'm going to use a scale. I'm going to load it up with grease, and I'm just going to slowly work it in and pack it into that central groove. I use the edge of the scale to make a clean surface on the inside, and then do the same thing with the other one. Now that I have those both packed with grease in their O-rings, I can install them by hand into my end blocks. I will use an adjustable wrench to make sure I can feel when these gland nuts, they touch the V-packing inside, and I'm going to stop right as they hit the V-packing. I don't want to compress the V-packing yet because that'll make it difficult to install my piston rods. The next step is going to be to install the piston rods. This is my last brown O-ring. With a little bit of grease. It's going to go in this groove right here on the male piston rod. And I use a screwdriver to work that O-ring down and over those threads and then onto that O-ring groove. And then the male rod with the male threads on it, and it's also got the cutout on one end, that is going to go into the right end block. The way I always remember it is it goes into the block without the cutouts on it. This is the outside and this is the inside block where my base ratio sleeve is going to link here to my catalyst one. So I'm going to install it into the gland nut and kind of rock it around so that it doesn't cut any seals, and push it in and tap it through. Remove any excess grease. And then move on and do the same thing on this side. This one right here, you want to avoid getting grease onto those threads. So I'm going to grab a little piece of a paper towel and I'm going to make a makeshift plug. If you just use the corner of a paper towel, kind of wad it up and then screw it into those threads to make a plug to keep the grease out of those threads when you install it. You try to want to make sure that there's no extra, nothing going to get stuck inside of your sleeve here. Now I can install this into my left end block. Again, same thing, get it started, tap it through. I can remove the excess grease and then remove that, making sure that I don't have any grease on the inside of my threads. Almost through. The next step is going to be to install 1/2 of the piston assembly here. This is the catalyst piston assembly, and you have these spring-loaded cup seals. The springs on this center piston have to be facing out opposite of each other, and they're going to install on this center piston with this O-ring and the center groove, and finally with the outside pistons holding everything together. If what you're doing today is the base ratio sleeve, the process is the same up to this point, and now you have this assembly that goes inside of your base ratio sleeve. You have your center piston and you'll have a O-ring in the middle. Then you have this large diameter Teflon cup seal, which will be facing out, and then your outside piston with that grooved out portion facing in. And then we do the same thing for the other side. The cup facing out, and you make your assembly this way. So let's do that for the catalyst side. I'm going to start with my outer piston, and the lip is going to face towards the threads. I'm going to push it over this O-ring. Then I'm going to install my TFE O-ring into the groove here. It's a little bit tight, so work it around and it snaps into place. A little bit of lubricant on the cup seal, and use your thumbs and fingers to just try to guide it onto the center piston without deforming any of the edges of it, the sealing edges. Once it's fully seated, we can install it onto the piston, on the piston rod. Now, it's important to only do one side of this center piston at a time, and I'm going to install this into my sleeve. So this is my ratio sleeve, and I'm going to make sure that it's free of any dust and debris. Check the inside diameter and make sure it looks good. And then use a little bit of grease on one side to get everything moving. At this point, I'm going to just install the one side. The reason for this is I don't want to fold over one of the cup seals. If I install both cup seals and then force the sleeve over, it can cause damage to the sealing edge of this cup seal, and then that cup seal is ruined and you have to get a new set. So I do one side at a time. Get this lined up, very tall, and then I press it into place and seat it into that O-ring. Again, avoid using a hammer or a mallet to push these together. You don't want to deform the sleeve, and you don't want to shear your O-rings. Now I'm going to use a dead blow plastic. I don't want to hurt the sleeve here, to just send this all the way through to the other side, being very careful that I only push it far enough to where my other cup seal does not come out of the end of my sleeve. Once I've pushed it far enough so that I only have one side of my piston showing, I can remove excess grease and install my other cup seal. Remember, springs facing out. And finally, my last outer piston. And then try to make sure there's no grease on those mating threads. Now to install these together, I'm using a red thread locker. I'm just putting a little bit on the end of these threads to make sure that this doesn't come loose during machine operation. You don't have to go crazy with this stuff. Just put a little bead and work it into the threads. Now we're going to swing this around and we're going to put everything together. Once you hit shoulder to shoulder, rotate your end blocks so that the ports are lined up. I need my 1/4 inch NPTs on the same side, as well as my exit ports and my mounting bolts. I don't want to install it all the way and find out that it's crooked. That means you have to take it back apart and reorient it. So I'm orienting this in the correct direction, and then I'm using my dead blow to send this seal into the sleeve. Once you've got it into the sleeve, you can press the two together. And seat them into each other. At this point, we want to stop and tighten these piston rods completely together. I use 2 5/8 open-end wrenches, one on either side, and tighten those rods. It's a shoulder to shoulder fit. So once you feel that shoulder, snug it up and you're good to go. Final step of this assembly is to install your tie rods. You have 4 tie rods that go around the outside of these sleeves, all the way through the holes, and then mounting to the other side. I like to split the difference of thread on either side, so I have the same amount of thread sticking out on either side, and then continue with the other 4. Once I have them all snugged by hand, I'm going to use 3/4 inch wrench, box end wrench, as well as a 3/4 inch socket. I'm going to tighten these in a star pattern. Tighten by hand a little bit. I'm just working around back and forth to tighten these down. I'm going to finish off by checking these two for tightness. Flipping to the other side, checking these for tightness. And that's the completed catalyst ratio sleeve assembly.